All the doctors gave up. They said the billionaire would never wake up until the Maid's toddler did this. The Hargrove estate sat at the top of Clearwater Ridge, like a crown that no longer had a king to wear it. 42 rooms, 17 bathrooms, a wine cellar that stretched beneath the earth like a cathedral, and grounds so meticulously manicured that even the hedges seemed to hold their breath. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place where happiness was manufactured on demand. From the inside, it felt like the most expensive mausoleum in the state of Connecticut. Ethan Hargrove had built his empire the way most men of 33 should not have to, by burying everyone who ever loved him. His father died of a heart attack when Ethan was 22, the week before Ethan closed his first billion-dollar deal. His mother, Margaret, followed 3 years later, cancer taking her slowly and without mercy over 14 months that Ethan spent flying between hospital rooms and boardrooms, never quite present in either. He had no siblings, no wife. He had come close once, a woman named Claire who had golden hair and a laugh like Sunday morning, but she left when she realized that Ethan Hargrove didn't know how to be present for anyone who didn't appear on a quarterly earnings report. So, he lived alone in the Hargrove estate with a rotating staff of 41 employees and not a single person he could call at 2 in the morning when the silence became unbearable. The accident happened on a Tuesday in late October, the kind of gray and grieving day that October in New England tends to produce. Ethan had been driving himself, something he rarely did, but his driver had called in sick and Ethan, stubborn as he was brilliant, had refused to wait for a replacement. The roads were wet. He was tired. He had been awake for 31 hours, pushing through a merger that would add another $300 million to a portfolio he had long since stopped caring about. The truck came from a left. The impact was catastrophic. By the time the ambulance reached him, Ethan Hargrove's heart had stopped twice. They restarted it. Barely. He was airlifted to Hartford Memorial, where the best neurological team in the Northeast was assembled with the kind of speed that only extreme wealth can purchase. Dr. Raymond Okafor, 54, chief of neurology, led the team. Beside him stood Dr. Priya Nandini, 47, one of the country's foremost coma specialists. Dr. Marcus Webb, 41, trauma neurosurgeon. Dr. Sarah Callahan, 38, neurorehabilitation. Dr. James Thornton, 44, physiatrist. Dr. Elena Vasquez, 31, the youngest on the team and perhaps the most quietly hopeful of them all, though even her hope began to crack in the weeks that followed. The diagnosis was grim. Severe traumatic brain injury. Diffuse axonal damage. Glasgow Coma Scale score of 4 on arrival. The brain bleeds were controlled. The swelling eventually began to subside. But Ethan Hargrove did not wake up. Days became weeks. Weeks collapsed into months. The monitors beeped their steady, indifferent rhythm. Nurses rotated in and out. Specialists were flown in from Johns Hopkins, from the Mayo Clinic, from a renowned facility in Zurich that specialized in long-term coma recovery. Every consultation ended the same way, with careful, professional language that translated in human terms to, "He is gone. The body is here, but the man is gone." Dr. Okafor pulled Ethan's estate attorney aside on a cold December morning, for months after the accident. He was not a man given to unnecessary softness. 40 years of medicine had taught him to deliver truth cleanly, the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. "We have done everything that can be done," he said quietly. "The probability of meaningful recovery diminishes significantly with each passing week. You should begin thinking about next steps." It was, the doctor later admitted, the hardest sentence he had ever spoken. The estate continued to run because estates like the Hargrove estate are built to run themselves, staffed with people whose professionalism does not waver simply because the person at the center of everything has gone silent. The household manager, a precise and deeply loyal woman named Patricia Haynes, kept everything exactly as it had been the morning of the accident. She could not have explained why, exactly. It simply felt like the right thing to do. It was Patricia who made the decision that would change everything, though she did not know it at the time and would not have believed it if someone had told her. Her longtime cleaning supervisor, a woman named Rosa Delgado, 28 years old, originally from San Antonio, Texas, with a quiet dignity about her that made even the wealthiest guests instinctively treat her with more respect than they typically extended to household staff, had recently lost her babysitter. The teenager down the street who had been watching Rosa's 3-year-old daughter, Lily, had gone back to school after winter break, and Rosa had no one. Her mother was in Texas. The daycare was full. She had already used every favor available to her and had come to Patricia with her hat in her hand, prepared to give her 2 weeks' notice. Patricia had looked at her for a long moment. "Bring the child," she said simply. Rosa blinked. "Mrs. Haynes, I couldn't possibly. The East Wing is empty. Mr. Hargrove is at the hospital. Bring the child. Keep her quiet and keep her out of the formal rooms, and no one will say a word." Patricia straightened a pen on her desk with military precision. "We are not going to lose you, Rosa. You are the best person on the staff. Bring the child." And so Rosa Delgado began bringing Lily to work. Lily Delgado was 3 years old and operated according to no known law of physics or social convention. She had enormous brown eyes that took up what seemed like a third of her face, and hair that Rosa braided each morning into 2 pigtails that Lily usually dismantled by 9 a.m. She spoke in a mixture of English and Spanish that followed its own grammatical logic, called strangers Mr. and Mrs., regardless of gender, and had an opinion about everything. She was also, as 3-year-olds sometimes are, possessed of a kind of fearless emotional radar that adults spend their entire lives trying to reclaim. Rosa kept her in the East Wing mostly. The kitchen staff adored her. The groundskeepers taught her the names of birds. She was, in the gray and grieving silence of the Hargrove estate, a small and relentless source of light. The hospital was 40 minutes away. Rosa visited sometimes on days off, because Patricia had asked the staff to take turns sitting with Mr. Hargrove. "Just so the room has a living presence," Patricia had said, in a voice that did not invite discussion. Rosa had sat beside him twice. She had found, both times, that she could not talk to him. She told him about the estate, about the cardinal that had come back to the elm tree by the East Garden, about Lily's latest observations on the nature of clouds and cookies. She didn't know if he could hear her. She talked anyway. Lily had never been to the hospital. Not yet. By the time January gave way to February, the Hargrove estate had settled into a kind of suspended grief, not the sharp, gasping kind that follows sudden loss, but the slow and colorless kind that sets in when hope begins to feel like an indulgence no one can afford. The medical team had not formally withdrawn. Dr. Okafor was too careful and too thorough a physician to close a case without absolute certainty, and Dr. Vasquez, the youngest of the group, the one who had gone into neurology specifically because she believed the brain was capable of things science had not yet learned to measure, continued to push for additional monitoring, additional testing, additional time. Her colleagues respected her. They also, quietly, felt sorry for her. They had seen this before. They knew how it ended. "Elena," Dr. Callahan said one afternoon, finding her junior colleague standing alone in the observation room, watching the monitors with an expression that mixed clinical focus with something far more personal. "You have to protect yourself, too. You can't save them all." "He's 33 years old," Dr. Vasquez said, without turning around. "He's my age. He is exactly my age." Dr. Callahan had no answer for that. She put a hand briefly on the younger woman's shoulder and left her there. The truth was that Ethan Hargrove's brain was not entirely quiet. There were patterns in the EEG readings that Dr. Vasquez kept returning to, small fluctuations, subtle and irregular, that the more experienced members of the team attributed to normal autonomic function and background noise. She wasn't convinced. She had ordered 3 additional scans over the past 6 weeks and had presented her findings to Dr. Okafor with the careful, methodical precision of someone who knows they are fighting a losing argument and has decided to fight it anyway. He had listened. He had reviewed her data. He was not dismissive. Raymond Okafor had not survived 40 years of medicine by being dismissive of careful observation. But he had also seen what prolonged hope does to families, to staff, to patients themselves when the outcome is ultimately the same. Continue monitoring, he told her, but prepare the team for a family meeting next week. It's time. There was no family. That was the unbearable part. The estate attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, had become the de facto point of contact. He was professional, efficient, and visibly uncomfortable sitting in hospital conference rooms discussing the fate of a man he had known primarily through legal documents. He asked precise questions. He took precise notes. He did not cry because Gerald Fitch had spent 30 years in estate law specifically to avoid situations that required crying, and he was not about to start now. But he drove back to Hartford Memorial 3 times that week, for no reason he could articulate in professional terms, and sat in the hallway outside Ethan's room for 20 minutes each time before driving back to his office. At the estate, Rosa had settled into a quiet and careful routine. She arrived each morning at 7:15, Lily in tow, bundled in a puffy pink coat that made her look like a small and determined raspberry. Lily had, over the course of 6 weeks, become something of an institution among the household staff. She had given everyone nicknames. The head gardener, a taciturn man of 60 named Harold, was Mr. Flowers. The chef, a classically trained Frenchman named Michel, was Cookie Man, a designation Michel pretended to find undignified and secretly treasured. Patricia Haynes herself had been named the boss lady, which Patricia felt was not inaccurate. Lily was also, it had to be said, developing a concerning interest in a room she was not supposed to know about. It had started innocuously enough. Rosa had been cleaning the upstairs gallery, a long room lined with portraits of Hargrove ancestors, when Lily had wandered to the doorway at the end of the hall. It was the door to Ethan's private study, kept locked but left slightly ajar that morning because the window inside needed cracking for ventilation. Rosa had been 3 rooms away. Lily had pushed the door open and walked inside. When Rosa found her, Lily was standing in front of the large desk, looking at the framed photograph that sat in the center of it. It was a professional portrait, Ethan at perhaps 30, in a dark suit, photographed outdoors somewhere with mountains behind him, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was composed and distant, and if you looked at it long enough, profoundly lonely. "Mama," Lily said, pointing at the photograph, "that man is sad." Rosa had gently guided her daughter back into the hall and locked the study behind them. She had thought about what Lily said for the rest of the day and well into the evening, after she had given Lily a bath and read her 3 books and watched her fall asleep with one arm wrapped around a stuffed elephant named Gerald. That man is sad. 3-year-olds, Rosa had learned, were not burdened by the social contracts that teach adults to look past things. They simply saw what was there. She went back to the hospital that Saturday. Alone this time, Lily was at a neighbor's for the afternoon. She sat beside Ethan's bed and looked at him for a long time. The monitors beeped. The machines breathed. His face was still. Not peaceful, exactly, but held in a kind of suspension that reminded her of water just before it freezes. Present, but arrested. "My daughter says you're sad," Rosa told him. "I think she might be right. I think maybe you were sad before the accident too. I think maybe that's the thing about you that no one in those board meetings or those news articles ever talked about." She folded her hands in her lap. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I think you deserve to have someone talk to you like you're a person and not a case file. So here I am." The monitor beeped. The machine breathed. Ethan Hargrove did not move. But Dr. Vasquez, reviewing the archived EEG data that evening from her laptop at home, stopped at a particular 60-second window and stared at it for a very long time. The pattern was slight, barely there. A whisper in the noise. But it was there on Saturday afternoon, between 2:15 and 2:16 p.m. She cross-referenced it with the visitor log. Rosa Delgado had signed in at 2 o'clock. Dr. Vasquez sat back in her chair and pressed her hands flat on the table in front of her, the way she did when something she had not yet learned to name was taking shape at the edge of her understanding. She did not sleep much that night. Dr. Elena Vasquez had a habit, developed over years of residency and refined through 5 years of independent practice, of writing things down in a small green notebook she kept in the left pocket of her white coat. Not clinical notes. Those lived in charts and systems and the hospital's electronic records. The green notebook was for the other kind of observation, the kind that didn't fit cleanly into data fields, the kind that felt important in a way she couldn't always immediately justify. She wrote 3 things in the notebook the morning after she reviewed Rosa Delgado's visit. Visitor, cleaning staff, estate employee, no prior medical relationship with patient. Spoke to him for approximately 45 minutes. EEG response. Subtle but distinct. 3rd time this pattern has appeared. First 2 instances also on Saturdays. Previous Saturday visitors. Estate attorney, no response. Hospital chaplain, no response. Nurse Delacroix, extended shift check-in, no response. What is different about this woman? She thought about it all morning, through 2 patient consultations and a department meeting that she sat through without absorbing a single word. By afternoon, she had requested Rosa Delgado's contact information from the estate's household manager, Patricia Haynes. Patricia had given it without asking why. Patricia Haynes had spent 40 years managing large households and had learned that when someone asked a focused question in a quiet voice, the best policy was to answer it. Rosa was surprised by the call. She stood in the east wing hallway of the estate, Lily balanced on her hip, and listened as Dr. Vasquez explained, carefully, professionally, without allowing herself to sound as urgently hopeful as she felt, that she had noticed something in the monitoring data and wanted to ask Rosa some questions about her visits. I didn't do anything, Rosa said, honestly and immediately. I just talked to him. What did you talk about? Dr. Vasquez asked. Rosa thought about it. The estate. A bird that came back to one of the trees. My daughter. She paused. He seemed lonely to me. I know he can't respond. But he seemed lonely and I didn't want him to feel alone, so I just talked. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Rosa could hear the sound of a pen against paper. Mrs. Delgado, Dr. Vasquez said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that I'm asking in complete seriousness, even though I understand if it sounds unusual. Okay, Rosa said. Would you be willing to visit again? And would you be willing? Is there any possibility of bringing your daughter? Lily, as if she had heard and already decided, looked at Rosa with her enormous eyes and said, We go see the sad man? Rosa stared at her daughter for a moment. Yes, she told Dr. Vasquez. We can come. The visit was scheduled for the following Thursday morning. Dr. Vasquez had spent the intervening days in a careful and very private campaign to justify additional monitoring time. She had presented her data, the 3 EEG instances, the visitor correlations, the subtle but replicable pattern, to Dr. Okafor in his office on a Tuesday afternoon, with the green notebook open beside her printed charts as though the handwritten notes might carry their own form of clinical authority. Dr. Okafor had looked at the data for a long time. He had removed his glasses and cleaned them, which was, in the estimation of every resident who had ever trained under him, a sign that he was actually considering something carefully rather than simply appearing to. He put his glasses back on. You believe there is meaningful auditory processing occurring, he said. It was not quite a question. I believe something is occurring when this specific visitor speaks to him, Dr. Vasquez said. I can't tell you what it means yet. I'm asking for the chance to find out. A cleaning woman and a toddler, Dr. Webb said, from the corner of the room where he had been listening with his arms folded, and an expression that suggested he found the entire conversation professionally embarrassing. We're discussing a cleaning woman and a toddler as neurological intervention. We are discussing an observed and documented response pattern, Dr. Vasquez said, with a steadiness in her voice that she was quietly proud of, the source of which I am attempting to investigate. If the pattern had been produced by a pharmacological intervention, we would call it a clinical observation. The mechanism of stimulus doesn't change what the data shows. Dr. Okafor looked at Dr. Webb. Dr. Webb looked at the ceiling. One visit, Dr. Okafor said. Full monitoring. Document everything. Thursday morning arrived with pale winter sun and the particular quality of cold that makes the air feel clean. Rosa dressed Lily with extra care, a soft blue dress, white tights, the brown leather shoes with the small buckle that Lily called her fancy shoes. Lily submitted to the careful braiding of her hair with unusual patience, as though she understood, in the wordless way of small children, that something important was happening. They met Dr. Vasquez in the hospital lobby. Lily looked up at the doctor, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of efficient posture that hospital work produces, and announced, "You have pretty shoes, too." Dr. Vasquez looked down at her entirely standard-issue hospital footwear and smiled in a way that reached somewhere behind her eyes.
"Thank you," she said.
"I'm very glad you came." The room was arranged with additional monitoring equipment that had been installed as unobtrusively as possible. 2 nurses were present. Dr. Vasquez stood to the side. Rosa carried Lily in and stopped just inside the door, and Lily went quiet for the first time all morning. She looked at Ethan Hargrove in his hospital bed, the machines, the tubes, the stillness of him, and her small face worked through something complicated and serious. Then she said, very quietly, "He looks tired." "He is tired, baby," Rosa said. "He's been sleeping for a very long time." Lily was quiet for another moment. Then she turned to her mother and said, with complete 3-year-old certainty, "I want to hold his hand." In the corner of the room, Dr. Vasquez did not move. She did not look at the monitors. She looked at the little girl in the blue dress, and she held her breath. Rosa looked at Dr. Vasquez, and Dr. Vasquez gave a small, careful nod. Rosa carried Lily to the bedside and lowered her gently, so she was sitting on the edge of the chair that had been placed there for visitors. Lily looked at Ethan's hand where it rested against the white blanket, large and still, a man's hand, with a small scar along the thumb from some long-ago accident that had left its permanent record in his skin. Lily reached out and wrapped both of her small hands around 2 of his fingers. The room was so quiet that the monitors seemed louder than usual. "Hi," Lily said to the sleeping man. "I'm Lily. My mama talks about you. She says you live in the big house with the birds." She paused, with the conversational style of someone who is accustomed to doing most of the talking. "I like birds. There's a red one. Mama says it comes back every year because it likes the tree. I think it comes back because it remembers." She tipped her head to one side. "Do you remember things? When you sleep?" Rosa had her hand pressed against her mouth.
She didn't trust herself to speak.
Dr. Vasquez was watching the monitors with the focused stillness of someone who has just seen something move at the edge of their vision and is very carefully not looking directly at it yet. The EEG reading was doing something. It was subtle. It was not the dramatic, unmistakable spike that happened in movies. It was a shift in pattern, a deepening, a change in the rhythm of the waves that she had only ever seen in this patient 3 times before, and never with this consistency, never building like this, tear upon quiet tear, as the little girl kept talking. "My elephant is named Gerald," Lily continued, apparently having decided that the sleeping man needed to know this. "He's at home. I would have brought him, but Mama said hospitals are for people, not elephants, but I think that's not always true because animals make people feel better. My abuela has a dog, and whenever she is sad the dog sits on her feet, and then she feels better." She considered this. "Maybe you need a dog." One of the nurses made a small sound. The other one had turned away, ostensibly to check something on the equipment, though her shoulders were doing something that suggested she was not checking equipment. Lily was quiet for a moment, her small hands still wrapped around his fingers. She looked at his face with the careful attention of someone performing a very important examination. "You should wake up," she said simply. "My mama makes really good food and she's nice, and the house has a lot of rooms. You shouldn't be in here. It smells funny." She wrinkled her nose. "Outside smells better. There's a bird." She patted his hand with both of hers, 3 gentle, deliberate pats, the way a very small person pats things to let them know they are real and present and seen. And Ethan Hargrove's fingers moved. It was not dramatic. It was not a cinematic awakening. It was the faintest curl of 2 fingers, the ones Lily was holding, a slow and tentative closing, like someone reaching for something in the dark without quite knowing what they're reaching for. But it was movement. Purposeful, responsive, unmistakable movement. Dr. Vasquez was at the monitor in 4 steps. Her voice, when she spoke, was stripped entirely of professional composure for approximately 3 seconds before she got it back. "Get Dr. Okafor," she said to the nurse behind her.
Right now.
"Tell him to come right now." Rosa had seen it. She was standing with her hands pressed together in front of her face, tears running freely, making no effort to stop them. Lily looked at his fingers and back at his face and said, with enormous satisfaction, "See? He was just waiting." Dr. Okafor arrived in 4 minutes. He reviewed the monitoring data, examined the patient, and stood at the bedside for a long moment in the particular silence of a man revising something fundamental that he had believed for a long time. "Talk to him again," he said quietly, looking at Lily. Lily, who had been eating a small packet of crackers that one of the nurses had produced from somewhere, looked up at him with her enormous eyes. "Okay," she said, and set down her crackers and took Ethan's hand again and began telling him about the cardinal. Over the next 40 minutes, under full monitoring with all 5 remaining specialists cycling in and out of the room in various states of professional amazement, Ethan Hargrove's responsiveness continued to increase. By the end of the hour, he was tracking to sound. By the end of the 2nd hour, during which Lily fell asleep in Rosa's arms, exhausted by the importance of the morning, his eyes had opened. Not fully, not all the way. A sliver of consciousness, there and then gone again, like a light under a door in a dark house. But open. Dr. Webb, who had stood in Dr. Okafor's office 5 days earlier with his arms folded and his professional skepticism displayed like a flag, was now sitting in a chair in the hallway outside Ethan's room with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. Not in despair. The opposite. Dr. Vasquez wrote one more thing in the green notebook that afternoon, sitting in the family consultation room with a cup of coffee gone cold beside her. She just held his hand. She talked to him. She saw him, not the case, not the prognosis, not the tragedy, just him. And something in him answered. Maybe that's all it ever was. Maybe he just needed someone to see him. It took 3 more weeks. Not the instantaneous, complete restoration of movies and wish fulfillment. Real recovery is slower and more effortful and more extraordinary than fiction tends to capture. There were days of confusion, days of exhaustion, days when Ethan could track a voice but not form words, when he could hold a hand but not process where he was or how long he had been gone. There were setbacks that sent the medical team back to their data and their consultations, quiet days that required patience no one had known they possessed. But he was climbing. Dr. Vasquez called it, in her notes, a sustained and progressive trajectory of recovery unprecedented given duration and injury severity. In the green notebook, she called it a miracle and then crossed that word out and then wrote it again and left it. Lily came back every Thursday. This was Dr. Vasquez's protocol, gently established, carefully documented, and it had the full support of Dr. Okafor, who had spent considerable time in the intervening weeks reviewing literature on consciousness, attachment, auditory stimulus, and the neurological effects of emotional recognition. He was building toward a paper. He suspected it would be one of the more unusual papers of his career.
He found he didn't mind.
Lily was not particularly impressed by any of this. She arrived each Thursday in her best shoes, with a drawing she had made at home specifically for the occasion, crayon portraits of the cardinal, of Gerald the elephant, of the big house, of herself and her mama, and she taped them to the wall beside Ethan's bed, one each week, creating a gallery of crayon brightness in the clinical white space that the nurses began defending fiercely against any suggestion of removal. She talked to him every week about the birds, about Gerald, about Cookie Man's soup and Mr. Flowers, and the way snow looked on the big iron gate at the front of the estate. She updated him faithfully and completely, the way a very small journalist might, the way someone does when they believe the person they're talking to deserves to know what the world has been doing while they were away. The first time Ethan spoke a full sentence, it was a Thursday. Rosa was sitting beside him. She had taken to sitting closer now, not the careful distance she had maintained in the early weeks, but the closer proximity of someone who has been through something significant with another person and no longer needs the formality of distance. Lily was in her lap, working on a drawing. Ethan had been awake for most of the morning. Really awake, tracking, responsive, his eyes clear in a way they had not yet been. He looked at Lily's drawing. He watched her small hand moving the crayon with the focused intensity of a child doing serious work. Then, in a voice rough from weeks of disuse, cracked at the edges and barely above a whisper, he said, "Is that the cardinal?" Lily looked up. She looked at him, fully, directly, with those enormous eyes, and a smile broke across her face like sunrise. "You know about the cardinal," she said, with complete delight, as though this were the best possible thing that could have happened today, which, as far as she was concerned, it was. "He comes back every year because he remembers." "I told you." Ethan looked at her. Something in his face, the held-in, suspended quality of it, the distance that the people who had worked for him for years had simply accepted as part of who he was, shifted. His eyes filled. "You told me," he said. Rosa pressed her hand over her mouth again, because some situations simply require that, and looked at the window so he would have privacy for what was happening to his face, and in the window's reflection she could see all of it anyway, a 33-year-old man, returned from somewhere very far away, looking at a 3-year-old girl in a blue dress like she was a compass that had just pointed him home. He came home to the estate in March. The cherry trees along the front drive were just beginning to threaten bloom, tight pink buds against bare branches, all that color waiting for the right moment to commit. The household staff had arranged themselves in the entry hall, not by directive but by instinct, Patricia Haynes at the front, straight-backed and red-eyed with a precision she would deny afterward. Michelle and Harold and the nurses and the groundskeepers, all of them there, in the way that people gather when something has returned that they had been afraid was lost. Lily was standing at Rosa's side, in her fancy shoes. Ethan walked in on his own, slowly. With a cane he was already using less than his physical therapist would have preferred, because Ethan Hargrove had always been impatient, and recovery, it turned out, had not fully cured him of that. He looked at the entry hall. He looked at the people in it. He looked at Lily. She held up the drawing she had brought, this week's installment, a crayon rendering of the estate with a red bird in the biggest tree and a small figure with pigtails in the yard, and, in the corner, a tall figure that was, Rosa had realized when she saw it that morning, supposed to be Ethan. "I made your house," Lily said. "So, you remember what it looks like. So you come back." Ethan crouched down, carefully, with the slow deliberateness of a body still learning its new limits, until he was at her level. He looked at the drawing for a long time. "I'm back," he said. "I know," Lily said. "I said you would be." She held out the drawing. He took it. And then, with the complete and fearless certainty of a child who has never learned to hold back the things she feels, Lily Delgado put her arms around Ethan Hargrove's neck and hugged him, and he closed his eyes and held on, and in the entry hall of the Hargrove estate, surrounded by people who had kept faith in a long and terrible silence, something cracked open that had been sealed for a very long time. Not the accident. Not the coma. The thing before those. The loneliness that had been there so long that no one around him had thought to name it because it was simply part of who he was. Lily named it. By refusing to let it be invisible. By sitting beside a man the world had quietly given up on and holding his hand and talking to him like he mattered, because to her, without condition or calculation, he simply did. Rosa looked at him holding her daughter and felt the complicated, enormous thing that had been growing in the hallways and hospital rooms and Thursday visits. The thing she had told herself was compassion, was professionalism, was the natural feeling that comes from surviving something difficult alongside another person. She felt it fully and let it have its name, privately, in the part of herself where honest things live. Later, there would be conversations. There would be time. There would be cherry trees in full bloom on a warm April morning and coffee on the terrace, and the cardinal coming back to the elm tree like proof that some returns are simply in the nature of things. There would be Dr. Vasquez's paper, published in October, which would be discussed widely and cautiously and with great interest in neurological circles, about the role of emotional recognition and genuine human connection in consciousness recovery, and which would cite, in its most carefully worded section, the case of a 3-year-old child who had done what every instrument and intervention and accumulated expertise had failed to do, who had simply seen a lonely man in a dark place and held his hand and called him back. There would be a small brass hook installed near the front door of the Hargrove estate, at exactly the right height for a child, where a small pink coat could be hung. But first, this morning, the entry hall, the drawing in his hands, the little girl's arms around his neck, the cherry buds outside promising what they would become, the cardinal, somewhere in the elm tree, singing. Sometimes the most extraordinary medicine is simply being seen, and sometimes it takes the uncomplicated love of a child, who has not yet learned to look past the lonely, to remind a human heart that it still knows how to beat for something more than survival. It can beat for belonging. It was always capable of that. It just needed someone small enough to believe it without being asked.